everyone. So when we last were here, we were just showing how we could loop through a list with what we call a for loop, and that we could just use that to go through and spit out every single, every single object in our list of articles. So now what we want to do is take this just one small step further, which is we want to just not be looking at every single thing. We want instead to be looking at only the things that were published by the New York Times. So to do this, we're going to use what we call an if-else statement. Basically, this is just a way of saying if a particular thing is true, do one thing. Otherwise, do something else. And so it is written exactly as it sounds. So we're going to say if, and this is, by the way, where we kind of see what I would think of as like an implicit Boolean. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say if, let's see, my articles counter, right? Okay. So if, which is the current article. So I'm going to actually add now some comments here. So I'm going to say, hey, test an article has NY Times, because that's what NY Times as the source property. If it does, print the object, and then if not, print, I'm just going to print a message, we'll call it not NY Times, right? Obviously this is pretty arbitrary, we're doing this for the purposes of the exercise, but it will give us a way to go through this. So the first thing I can do is I can say if my articles counter, right? So again, remember counter is a variable. So the first time that it goes through every time when it starts at the value of 0, right? So it's just an integer, it's just a number, okay? The number is 0. So we start the number at 0. And every time the code that it's going to go through is it's going to go through all of the code that's between these curly braces. And when it gets to the last and do whatever it's supposed to do, and when it gets to this last curly brace, it goes, oh, okay, increase my value by 1. I'm going to check if the new value is less than the length of the my articles list, right? So we know the list of the length is 4. I'm going to check if it's less than 4. And if it is, then I'm going to go through the whole loop again, right? And then at the end of the loop, I'm going to increment my value by 1 and check if it's less than the length of the articles list. And if it is, I'm going to go through it again until eventually it'll go through this 4 times, right? It'll go through 0, 1, 2, 3. And then it'll get to the end and it'll say, okay, increment my value by 1. The value is 4, but 4 is, what I have said is I need it to be less than the length of my articles, right? So if I have 4 items in my list, the length is 4. If my counter's value is 4, it is equal to, not less than. And so it's going to say, oh, I'm no longer smaller than my articles dot length, than the length of the articles list. So I'm going to just carry on. And so I'm going to actually add a console log here that just says loops done. Right, just to again sort of verify that this is happening. Okay, so what I could say is if my articles counter, now I can say something like this, because what do I want to see? I want to see, okay, if the test of the article has New York Times as the source property, so I need to look at the source property and I need to compare it to the string New York Times. Now let's look at this a little bit more closely. So my articles in brackets counter, right, is counter again is just a number. So the first time through is going to be my articles, the 0th item, which is of course the item in index 0, which is the first item. Look at that item. And then the dot means look at the property called source. Now, this will work, what I have here, but it's pretty confusing. So I'm actually going to create a separate variable that I'm going to call var current article, okay? And I'm going to set it to my articles counter, right? So I'm going to set it to the current, the object that we're currently looking at, the item in the list that we're currently looking at. And why am I doing this? Honestly, because there's a few different reasons. One is it's much more readable. Makes much more sense to me to read, oh, I want to look at the source of the current article than to look at my articles counter, right? Like that just doesn't really make sense to me. So this is an example, again, first of all, we're creating descriptive variable names really helps the readability of our code. And the readability of your code doesn't matter just for other people, it's gonna matter for you because you're gonna leave this code and come back in a week and it's gonna be very difficult to remember what was going on if your variable names aren't descriptive. So I elect to create this variable called current article, which points to the object that's at the current index that I'm looking at. So I say, okay, if current article source equals New York Times, well, now it seems straightforward, actually. I'm going to say if it does, print the object. So if that's true, so if the source equals the New York Times. Now, you may have noticed that I have this double equals sign in here. Well, the problem is that, normally when we use an equals sign, it means two things are the same. Pardon me. It means two things are the same. However, the problem is that we've already been using the equals sign to say, hey, create a variable, give it, create a box in memory, give it this label, and put this value into it, right? So we're already using a single equal sign for what we call assignment, right? Assignment is the process of put this value in the box labeled my Boolean, my object, my list, right? So when we want to compare two things and say, is this thing equivalent to the other thing, we have to use a double equal sign. And so what will happen here is it will just say, look, if the source is the same as a string New York Times, right, which we know it is for some of them, then I want you to console log the object. So I want you to console log current article. Okay, pretty straightforward. Now, here's the thing. I want to give it a command. I want to say, if it does, print the object. If not, or what I might say is otherwise, okay, print not New York Times. I can do this with what we call an else statement. So I'm just saying, if one thing is true, do this. Otherwise, in any case where that thing isn't true, I'm going to just say console log, and I'm just going to copy my string right from here. Okay, so if this works as we expect, what we will see is, in the console, what we'll see is the two New York Times articles will be printed sort of in their entirety, if you will. The entire object will be printed. And then we'll have two other messages that say not New York Times. And we expect these to appear in order, right? So we expect to get this article, the not New York Times message, not New York Times message, and then this article again. Okay, so it's important to think through kind of what do we expect to happen if this works correctly, and what do we, and then see if that matches, see if that's what we get, right? It is obviously possible, as in many languages, to create statements that are grammatically correct but don't express what we want, right? So you can have something that doesn't generate any errors but still doesn't produce the output you're looking for. So I'll just flip back to my page here and reload it. And again, by reloading, it automatically runs the script. And you can see actually this is how it expresses when it gets the same message twice. I got exactly what I was hoping for. I got the object, right, my article, and then I got the message not New York Times twice, and then I got the article object again, and then I got this message that said the loop is done. Okay, so basically what I've done is I have a list of material. I'm using a for loop to go through it item by item, and then I am testing to see if an item has a particular value in a property. If it does, I'm printing it out. If it doesn't, I'm printing out kind of just a status message. So you'll notice again that I want you to notice a couple of things about this. So one is that you notice how our indenting works here. So I've got my for loop, right? And just the same way we see in HTML, something like with the div structures, right? Something that is inside something else, we signify with an indent. So in this case, all of this code is inside the for loop, so it's indented 1. This console message is inside my if-else statements, so it's indented 1 from there. Again, this is to visually help you understand what's going on in the code. Obviously, you would want to do additional commenting to make it clear what's happening. Here's the great thing. That's all there is. The only two functional structures that we have in basically all of programming are exactly these two. We have for loops and we have if-else statements, which we call conditionals, right? Because doing one thing is on the condition of something being true, and then otherwise we do something else. So that's it. We're going to come back. I'm going to come back for the last video just to show you one final step that we can take for kind of packaging up these ideas and how we're going to deal with our GitHub situation following that. All right, I'll see you in a minute.